Inside Rikers Island, survival before sentencing. The isolated complex. In the middle of New York City's East River sits a 413-acre jail complex that has become one of the most controversial correctional facilities in the United States. Rikers Island. Each year, thousands of people are sent here, not after conviction, not after sentencing, but while they are still legally innocent. Most are awaiting trial. Some cannot afford bail. Some are facing misdemeanor charges. Others are accused of serious felonies. But for all of them, survival begins the moment they step off the bus. Rikers Island has been the subject of federal investigations, civil rights lawsuits, Department of Justice reports, and decades of media scrutiny. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice released findings describing a pattern of excessive force against incarcerated adolescents. In 2021, a federal judge ruled that the jail system had fallen into crisis conditions requiring intensified oversight. Violence, staffing shortages, contraband weapons, and prolonged pretrial detention have defined the experience for many who pass through its gates. This is not a prison for the convicted. It is a jail for the accused. And for thousands, survival begins before sentencing. What Rikers is. Rikers Island is operated by the New York City Department of Correction. It is not a state prison facility. It is a city-run jail complex, primarily housing individuals awaiting trial in New York City's 5 boroughs. The complex includes multiple facilities, historically including Robert N. Davern Complex, RNDC. George Machin Detention Center, GMDC. Otis Bantam Correctional Center, OBCC. Anna M. Cross Center, AMKC. Eric M. Taylor Center, EMTC. Several facilities have closed or consolidated in recent years due to population decline and reform initiatives. Unlike state prisons, where individuals serve sentences after conviction, jails like Rikers primarily detain people pre-trial. According to data from the NYC Independent Budget Office and Department of Correction reports, a significant majority of people on Rikers are legally presumed innocent. As of the early 2020s, the average daily population fluctuated between approximately 5,000 and 7,000 individuals, far lower than its peak in the 1990s and early 2000s, when the population exceeded 20,000. But even with reduced numbers, conditions inside have repeatedly drawn scrutiny. In 2019, New York City passed legislation committing to closing Rikers Island and replacing it with smaller borough-based jail facilities by 2027. Whether that deadline will be met remains uncertain. For now, the island remains operational. And every day, new arrivals cross the bridge. Booking and arrival. For most people, the journey to Rikers begins in a borough courthouse holding cell. After arraignment, if bail is set and cannot be paid, or if remand is ordered, individuals are transferred to the custody of the Department of Correction. They are placed on transport buses and driven across the Rikers Island Bridge. Once inside, intake begins. Fingerprints. Photographs. Medical screening. Mental health evaluation. Property inventory. Classification assessment. The intake process determines housing placement, a decision influenced by charge severity, criminal history, gang affiliation, medical needs, and vulnerability factors. According to Board of Correction reports, intake areas can become crowded during high-volume periods. Delays of many hours have been documented. For some detainees, the first hours inside are disorienting. For others, especially those who have been here before, the routine is familiar. But what happens next depends on classification. And classification can determine survival. Pretrial detention, legally innocent. Under U.S. law, individuals held at Rikers Island are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Yet pretrial detention can last months. In some cases, years. According to NYC Criminal Justice Agency data, delays in court proceedings, including case backlogs, motion practice, and scheduling issues, can significantly extend detention for those unable to secure release. New York's bail reform laws, enacted in 2019 and amended in 2020, eliminated cash bail for many nonviolent offenses. However, judges may still set bail for certain charges, and remand remains possible. For those who cannot pay, jail becomes a waiting room. But it is a waiting room defined by uncertainty. Multiple independent investigations have found that prolonged pretrial detention can increase the likelihood of pleading guilty, even among individuals who may have viable defenses. This dynamic has been discussed in academic research, though each individual case differs. Inside Rikers, time is measured differently. Court dates, lockdowns, count times, and the unpredictable rhythms of jail life. The environment. Rikers Island has operated since the 1930s. Many of its buildings are aging. Reports from oversight agencies have documented infrastructure challenges, including plumbing issues, heating complaints, and maintenance delays. In 2021 and 2022, independent monitors appointed by federal court oversight described deteriorating conditions during periods of staff shortages. At times, housing units were left undersupervised due to correction officer absenteeism. An issue acknowledged by city officials and union representatives alike. When supervision drops, tension rises. Incarcerated individuals report increased fear during extended lockdowns. Correction officers report increased danger during staffing shortages. And oversight agencies report spikes in violence during crisis periods. In September 2021, a federal judge described conditions as posing grave safety concerns, ordering intensified monitoring of the jail system. These findings were documented in court filings and official reports. They were not isolated allegations. They were part of the public record. Violence inside. Violence at Rikers Island has been documented for decades. According to NYC Department of Correction data, slashings and stabbings involving improvised weapons have been reported repeatedly across facilities. In certain years, reported use of force incidents involving staff also increased, drawing criticism from oversight bodies. The 2014 U.S. Department of Justice investigation into adolescent facilities on Rikers found a pattern of excessive force against teenage detainees, including frequent reliance on physical force by staff. That report led to a federal settlement agreement requiring reforms. In later years, independent monitors reported ongoing compliance challenges. At the same time, assaults between incarcerated individuals, often involving contraband weapons, have remained a persistent issue. The precise causes of violence are debated. Contributing factors identified in reports include overcrowding during earlier decades, gang dynamics, staffing shortages, inadequate supervision, delayed disciplinary processes. What is publicly documented is this. For many detainees, personal safety becomes a daily calculation. Where to sit, who to associate with, when to remain silent. Adolescents and young detainees. For years, adolescents aged 16 and 17 were housed on Rikers Island under New York's former, Raise the Age, framework. The 2014 DOJ investigation focused specifically on violence against these young detainees. The findings were stark. Investigators documented frequent injuries, high rates of force, and inadequate supervision. Following reforms and legislative changes, most 16 and 17-year-olds are no longer housed on Rikers Island. They are now placed in separate facilities under the supervision of the Administration for Children's Services or specialized units. However, young adults aged 18 to 21 remain on Rikers, often housed in designated young adult units. Research suggests younger detainees are statistically more vulnerable to victimization in jail settings, though exact risk varies by housing assignment and classification. The adolescent era at Rikers remains a central chapter in its modern history. Mental health crisis. A significant percentage of individuals detained at Rikers Island have diagnosed mental health conditions. NYC Department of Correction and Correctional Health Services data indicate that a large portion of the jail population receives some form of mental health treatment. In multiple public hearings, officials have acknowledged the challenge of managing serious mental illness within a jail environment. Reports have documented delays in mental health appointments during staffing crises, incidents involving self-harm, disciplinary responses to behavior linked to psychiatric conditions. Advocacy organizations have argued that jail is not an appropriate setting for individuals with severe mental illness. City officials have stated that reforms and diversion programs are ongoing. In 2022 and 2023, several in-custody deaths were publicly reported. Some involved individuals with known mental health histories, though each case had specific circumstances and ongoing investigations. The exact cause of each death is determined by medical examiners and official investigations. What is clear from public record? Mental health remains one of the most urgent and complex issues inside Rikers. Daily life. A typical day at Rikers follows a structured schedule. Wake up. Count. Breakfast. Housing unit time. Court production for those scheduled. Limited recreation periods. Medical appointments. Evening count. Lock-in. Access to programming varies by housing assignment and operational status. During crisis periods, particularly in 2021, extended lockdowns were reported, with detainees confined to housing areas for prolonged hours due to staffing shortages. Advocates described conditions resembling near solitary confinement during those periods. City officials acknowledged severe operational strain. Conditions fluctuate, but routine remains rigid. Inside Rikers, predictability can offer stability. Or it can magnify confinement. And for those awaiting trial, every day inside raises the same question. How long until court? The cost of waiting. Pretrial detention has consequences beyond the jail walls. Research from multiple academic institutions has found correlations between pretrial detention and increased likelihood of job loss, housing instability, and family disruption. These are statistical findings, not individual certainties. But for many, time spent at Rikers means missed paychecks, strained relationships, and uncertain futures. Some cases resolve quickly. Others stretch across months of adjournments. And for individuals unable to post bail, waiting happens inside a facility long criticized for violence and instability. Rikers Island is not a sentence. But for thousands each year, it feels like one. And this is only the beginning. Federal oversight. By the early 2010s, conditions at Rikers Island had drawn national attention. In 2011, following reports of violence against adolescents, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York launched a civil rights investigation. In 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice released findings concluding there was a pattern and practice of excessive force against teenage detainees. The findings did not shut Rikers down. But they triggered federal oversight. The case evolved into what is known publicly as Nunez v. City of New York, a class-action lawsuit addressing use of force practices and conditions inside the jail system. A federal monitor was appointed. Reform benchmarks were established. Years later, compliance remained inconsistent. In 2021 and 2022, the monitor reported serious setbacks, particularly during staffing crises and operational breakdowns. In November 2022, a federal judge ruled that Rikers Island had fallen into constitutional crisis conditions and initiated a receivership process, a potential step toward removing control from city leadership if reforms failed. As of publicly available records, the receivership process remains under evaluation, with compliance measures ongoing. Oversight continues. Reform is mandated. But transformation has been slow. Staffing crisis. In 2021, Rikers Island experienced one of its most severe operational crises in modern history. According to public reports from the NYC Department of Correction and independent oversight bodies, staff absenteeism reached historically high levels. In some instances, housing areas reportedly operated with reduced supervision. City officials described emergency measures, including mandatory overtime and deployment of additional personnel. The Correction Officers Union cited unsafe working conditions and burnout as contributing factors. The result was instability. Extended lockdowns were documented. Court production delays increased. Access to medical care and programming was disrupted during peak crisis periods. In September 2021, New York City declared a state of emergency for the jail system. Multiple incarcerated individuals died in custody that year. Each death was subject to investigation by the New York City Medical Examiner and, where applicable, the Department of Investigation. Public reporting confirmed that 16 people died in NYC custody in 2021, the highest number in several years. Causes of death varied and were officially determined on a case-by-case basis. The crisis intensified public debate. Could Rikers Island be reformed? Or was closure the only solution? The plan to close Rikers. In October 2019, the New York City Council voted to close Rikers Island and replace it with 4 smaller borough-based jail facilities in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. The plan aimed for closure by 2027. The rationale was rooted in decades of criticism. Centralization on an isolated island. Aging infrastructure. Difficulty staffing and maintaining large-scale facilities. Supporters argued that borough-based jails would be closer to courts and families, improving access and reducing transportation delays. Opponents raised concerns about construction costs and neighborhood impact. As of publicly available updates, construction has faced delays. The target closure date remains subject to logistical and political challenges. Rikers Island has been scheduled for closure before. But this is the first time a legally binding plan was passed by city legislation. Whether the deadline will be met remains uncertain. For now, the island remains active. Life after release. For many, pretrial detention ends in one of 3 ways. Release on bail. Dismissal of charges. Or conviction followed by transfer to state prison. For those released, reintegration begins immediately. Academic research has found that even short periods of pretrial detention can disrupt employment and housing stability. Families absorb financial strain. Children experience separation. And reputations may be permanently altered, regardless of case outcome. Some individuals leave Rikers without conviction. Others plead guilty to resolve cases more quickly. Each case is unique. But the impact of time spent inside often extends beyond the courtroom. Rikers is temporary. Its consequences may not be. The human reality. Rikers Island is not defined by a single narrative. It is not only a place of violence. It is not only a symbol of reform. It is not only a political debate. It is a functioning jail complex holding thousands of legally innocent people awaiting trial. It has housed individuals accused of minor offenses. It has housed individuals accused of serious crimes. It has been condemned by federal investigators. It has been defended by some city officials as a system in transition. The public record documents. Excessive force findings. In-custody deaths. Staffing crises. Court-ordered oversight. Legislative closure plans. It also documents reform attempts. Population reduction over the past decade. Expanded mental health diversion initiatives. Policy changes following federal intervention. Both realities exist. Inside Rikers Island, survival before sentencing is shaped by classification decisions, housing assignments, staffing levels, and the unpredictable rhythms of jail life. For some, detention lasts days. For others, months or longer. All are presumed innocent under the law. But the experience of waiting can be defining. The island at night. From the outside, Rikers Island is a cluster of buildings in the East River. From inside, it is an ecosystem. A place where policy meets reality. Where court delays become confinement. Where reform promises face operational limits. Where survival begins before sentencing. The island's future remains uncertain. The oversight continues. The closure plan remains active. Until then, buses will continue crossing the bridge. Intake will continue. And thousands will continue waiting. Legally innocent. Physically confined. Inside Rikers Island. Rikers Island stands at the intersection of law, policy, and human consequence. It is not a prison in the traditional sense, yet it holds people who have not been convicted. It is not beyond oversight, yet it has struggled under federal supervision. It is scheduled for closure, yet it remains operational. The documented history of Rikers is complex and ongoing. And as long as pretrial detention remains part of the American justice system, the story of Rikers Island will remain part of that conversation. This has been a fully factual account based on publicly available records, government reports, and credible journalism. The system continues to evolve. And so does the story. If you found this deep dive informative and you value fact-based prison and justice documentaries, subscribe to the Inmate Diaries. We focus on verified records, official findings, and documented realities, no exaggeration, no speculation. Like the video, share your thoughts respectfully in the comments, and let us know which correctional system or case you'd like us to examine next. Until the next story. Stay informed.